Hi, my name is Sarah Hawkins. I am the former president. Actually, we just switched hands of Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice, which is a statewide organization, coalition really of public defense attorneys, institutional defenders, and private practitioners. And we do things like Brandon talked about. We go and we lobby at the legislative session. We work on improving the general defense practice in the community, and we offer support to our lawyers because doing what we do is very, very difficult. And I am also a chief deputy public defender, which is why I'm part of the NACJ organization. At present, I am only handling homicide cases. Why that is important today, why I think that's important today, is because the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty is holding this teach-in, for lack of a better word. And the DA has everything to do with whether or not a case goes forward toward the death penalty. So I'll just start giving you sort of broad strokes about what a district attorney does. Right here in Clark County, the district attorney essentially represents the state of Nevada for all cases that occur in Clark County. The district attorney has a civil division and a criminal division. I'm not going to worry about the civil division, although I will say that the civil division has control over family courts. This is really interesting because these are your CPS cases. These are your custody cases. And that stuff is really, really important because we have there isn't a lot of due process in family court cases. And when we're talking about separating families, employing folks in the district attorney who have empathy, understanding, and cultural competence when it comes to different types of parenting, different iterations of the nuclear family, all of that kind of stuff. That is something that's really, really important to take into consideration. I am more concerned with the criminal stuff. That is where my experience is. And so the district attorney is in charge of essentially deciding what gets prosecuted. The district attorney sets policies within the office that control things like what kinds of plea negotiations are offered to folks, whether or not something deserves prison time, whether or not they are going to prosecute police shootings. The DA essentially exercises a ton of authority in Clark County. And I think the easiest way to probably put it is that the DA defines justice for us, right? It's an elected position. We elect him or her, whoever takes that office, and how they run that office should be a reflection of the constituency. That's why we have elections. So to the extent a district attorney's actions, policy, hiring practices, lobbying tactics don't square with the constituents' values, those who elected him or her, that's going to be a really big problem. A good district attorney shouldn't be a pay-to-play district attorney. And that happens here in Las Vegas. You have an attorney, a private attorney that makes a ton of money and can donate a bunch of money to a district attorney's campaign. Those attorneys' clients get treated differently, for example, than public defense clients that don't have any money. They get better offers, they get more attention. If you dump 10 grand into Steve Wolfson's campaign, for example, you get an ear. You have a deputy in that office that's not doing what you want them to do or is not looking at a case the right way. You can buy time essentially to talk to the district attorney. That's what those campaign donations are. That's the only reason I can think of that a district attorney or that a defense attorney would contribute to that campaign, right? Is to get some sort of result for a client. Because generally speaking, defense attorney values don't map understandably, to prosecutorial values. A good DA will have control of his or her office. The district attorney's office is massive. There are a bunch of prosecutors that work in that office. We're talking about hundreds of people. A good district attorney is going to communicate clearly with those folks, make sure they are acting in accordance with the policies that he or she has put in place. They are going to treat all accused persons the same, regardless of their ability to pay. A good district attorney prosecutes police when they shoot civilians, just like they would prosecute any other homicide, right? There are too many times where I have seen cases of my own that map on a little too closely. And if roles were reversed, my client would be walking around, but they're not, because they don't wear a uniform. And so they are held responsible. A good district attorney makes sure that he hires deputies that care about justice more than they care about conviction. A good district attorney is not going to cultivate that kind of culture, but that culture is pervasive, not only here in Clark County, but nationally. So it's a really big problem. This is information, and you can look at, there are actually a ton of folks putting media stuff together right now in order to have an impact on the upcoming district attorney race. So I anticipate that there's going to be quite a bit of good information out there to help folks make decisions about who they would like to vote for. But the bottom line is you have to vote. You just have to vote in these races. You cannot imagine, if you haven't done it before or looked into it, how impactful a district attorney is, how much power a district attorney has, not only law enforcement wise, but legislatively. This is a guy here in Nevada, our Clark County district attorney has 2 district attorneys who are also working in the legislature. So they have the executive branch and the legislative branch all locked up. So we need to be looking for people, in my opinion, we need to be looking for folks who will honor the values of the community members who voted them into office. Right now, what those other than a few defense attorneys and some other folks that sort of happen to pay attention, the bulk of the folks that vote in these district attorney elections are prosecutors and cops. There are thousands of police officers on Metro's force. And like I said, there are hundreds and hundreds of attorneys in the district attorney's office. And because there is such low voter turnout in these elections, those 2 offices frequently decide the elections. So we need y'all to get involved, and thank you for being here to learn about this. And I have my email in the chat. I will talk to any of you about anything at any time. Just please reach out, get the information. And like I said, this is an election that has massive consequences, especially when it comes to communities who are disproportionately impacted by the negative aspects, the many negative aspects of the criminal legal system. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest. And I look forward to talking to more of you individually about sort of what's going on in this race, what the inside view is from defense attorneys who work with this office all the time, and what we can tell you and what questions we can answer so that you can make the most informed possible decision.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sarah. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns? Ms. Sandra, I see your hand went up first.
So I want to say thank you, and I want to amen, hallelujah, please vote. But I want to add on, because our district attorney's offices are partisan, they're not like the judges, and it's not like the sheriff, which are nonpartisan. That means they're in a closed primary. And so DA Wolfson was actually elected in the closed primary last time, because in 2017, the Democrats changed the law, and it used to be before 2017 2017, if there was only Democrats or only Republicans running, the top two went to the general election ballot and we had two choices. Then they changed it and said, if there's only one party running and there's one person that wins, that's it, the election's over, they're elected. And so we elected him in a closed primary. Only Democrats were allowed to vote, and it had under 20% turnout. That's why the number of people voting to decide, he was going to get elected was so small. So only his name got to go forward. So his name was on the general election ballot, but at that point he was already elected in a closed primary. And it bothers me that when I listen to the Democrats during the legislative session and they talk about elections being accessible and we all should be able to vote and there shouldn't be barriers, to then elect somebody that important in a closed primary is wrong. And I know that wasn't a question and I'm sorry, but you got me all riled up.
No, that's okay. I like people getting riled up. That's my jam.
Looks like we have a question from Oja. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, indeed. It's not a question. I was just applauding there.
Oh, my bad.
Thank you.
Sarah, I did have a question for you.
Sure, yeah.
Why is the DA's office one office?
What do you mean?
So, like, when you look at the rest of the state, like the DA is having a district attorney for the whole county makes sense, but like 80% of the state lives in Clark County. So why hasn't it been split up? Why aren't there multiple offices? Why is it just one person with that much authority?
I mean, technically, there are multiple offices. You have prosecutorial jurisdictions like Henderson Municipal Court. You also have North Las Vegas Municipal Court. You have Las Vegas City. You have, there are a number of different, prosecutorial entities in Clark County. But he is clearly, the Clark County DA is going to be the most powerful because that jurisdiction is overarching, right? So county charge, this is what I was telling you about with the dogs. One second. Go. I'm back. I'm sorry. So he just has just an insane amount of authority because he has jurisdiction not only over misdemeanors, but all of the very, very serious felony cases. So the consequences are a lot greater with somebody like Wolfson, who is in a county spot, than somebody who is a city attorney, for example, that only has jurisdiction over misdemeanors. And we're looking at a top end of 6 months in, jail, which is a lot of time, not saying it's not, but it's not the death penalty. And that's something that the county district attorney has to do. So I don't really know if that answers your question, except for that is how we are set up jurisdictionally. And Clark County is massive. We're talking about Searchlight. We're talking about Mesquite. We're talking about just this Moapa, this massive area, right? And so we're talking about rural counties as well. Rural areas as well. So he just has a lot of authority because of how large the jurisdiction is. And maybe if we broke it up, great, but I'm also not interested in more district attorneys. Being honest, I don't feel like we need more of those. If we have one that's in charge of that many things and we challenge that one person, then we have a chance to make even broader global change without going jurisdiction to jurisdiction and challenging folks. So if we can do something to get somebody in that DA position who is actually going to honor the democratic, we're being nonpartisan. If they're going to honor the values of the community they purport to represent, then that's great. I just haven't seen that yet.
All right, any other questions? I will take all of the turned off cameras as a no.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I want to move on to our next presenter, Mr. Oja. Do you mind introducing yourself, sir?
Most definitely. My name is Oja Vincent. I am the co-founder of the Force Trajectory Project. And what we do is basically we have started as just artists in society, and we began to use our skills to amplify the narratives of family members who are affected by state-sponsored violence, people who have had loved ones stolen by the state via law enforcement. So we've been doing it since 2009, 12 years now. And it has expanded to a sort of advocacy. In Las Vegas, my partner, Nisa Sun, had started, along with family members, a group called Families United for Justice Las Vegas. And so oftentimes we end up amplifying the stories from the more than 40 members of that group. It's about half survivors, half family members. And it's great to be here today. I'm honored to be with all of you guys today. I know a lot of you guys out there, and it's a moment right now of increasing importance for people to understand what is at stake as we have the sheriff moving to take a bigger position of power within Nevada. And so I just wanted to start off with saying, let's take a look back at last summer and his response. And by him, I mean Lombardo. His response to legal observers being arrested, he was quoted as saying that they were participating, not observing, believe that his officers are wrong. So as the sheriff, what we have is kind of the persona of law enforcement overall in the state. If we look back and we look at the mass media messages and the propaganda of Hollywood, all the way through to the beginning of Hollywood, we can see, the populace saying that I'm the new sheriff in town, and that this person represents the culture of policing overall. So when you have somebody who has a nickname like Lying Joe Lombardo, it's a problem. We look forward from that legal observer arrest and what happened after that. On June 2nd, there were 2 shootings, and there was a press conference. There was a shooting at Circus. We know there was a shooting in front of the federal building where we lost a civilian. And he stated that basically one tragedy led to another. So he actively took the onus off of these police officers, Metro, and put it on to the protesters, right? And he also stated that there are exceptions to every rule because they acted preemptively in arresting folks when they arrested illegal observers, because he claimed that there was an intention to go and block a freeway or whatever it was that he was saying was going to happen. So we're getting dangerously close in these dominant narratives to something like Minority Report. And when you look back at the history of policing, right, there's a stark difference between the image of the police as people who protect and serve everyone in society and the reality, which is that they've only served and protected people who own property. And so that whole adage about there being 2 different justice systems, 2 different treatments under the law is absolutely true. And as that begins to get more and more uncovered with technology, as we saw George Floyd extrajudicially assassinated last summer, we can see more and more of the truth. Part of the problem with this also is that he kind of wiggled his way out when he announced his candidacy or his intention to be a candidate for that higher office, that he was asked if he believed that the election was stolen or not, and he refused to answer the question. So leaving that open space really empowers radical right violence. And there's a book actually called Police: A Field Guide by a gentleman named Michael Carrera, which refers to police officers as violence workers. So this culture of violence is something that's prevalent. We all know this, but a lot of these elected officials and not elected officials who are law enforcement have been military first type of abuses overseas, and then come back to our communities and police our communities as if they're occupying foreign territory. So it's also really important here to mention that the last real federal effort to kind of actually look at the ineffectiveness of policing was called the Wickersham Commission back in 1929, which was established by President Herbert Hoover, right? And this was an effort to investigate, an attempt rather, to reform police. And the actual name of it was the Attorney General. It's named after the Attorney General at the time, George Wickersham, but it was called the National Commission on law observance and enforcement. One of the most important things that did was it attempted to separate police from politics. Up until that time, police were mostly run by politicians. They were handpicked by politicians. One of the things we like to point at is just a few years ago, Michael Bloomberg in New York referring to the police as my police, my law enforcement, clearly showing that these elected officials are using them as an arm of the state to crush any effort to test them. So when we look at it historically, the beginning of the police was really a watchman that was set up in the 1600s. And that was usually to handle colonists and what we call today vagrancy, is where a lot of the original vagrancy laws come from. And that was the main purpose. And then in the South, the main purpose, of course, was the original terminology of patrolling. The slave patrols was to catch folks who had escaped enslavement and return them back to plantations. And so when we look at the root and the history of policing, we can see very clearly why things are the way they are today. So there's a clear difference between what is presented by law enforcement, i.e., and primarily by the sheriff in concert with the DA, right? They kind of bounce off of each other. The sheriff is this kind of face and personality of the law enforcement at large. And then the DA, as Sarah Hawkins was stating, is kind of the main gatekeeper for who gets indicted, who doesn't get indicted. And when we look at the indictments and lack thereof, we can see that there's a very stark difference in the murders that are committed. When we look at that, we're looking at over 1,500 people a year, 3 to 5 individuals a day in the United States, and less than 0.01% on a conviction, and then only around 14% on an indictment, right? And this all comes from a documentary called Unarmed Black Male. I believe the BBC put that out. But when family members go through a murder, they're facing a bunch of different barriers to achieving justice, right? One of those main barriers is qualified immunity. So we know that qualified immunity means that a government official in general, but this really applies in our context when someone's murdered to law enforcement, you can't bring a civil case against that person. So it's only been outlawed recently in 2 states, Colorado and New Mexico, and in 1 city, which is New York City. Beside that, we don't see any outlawing of qualified immunity. So the way it usually goes down is like, you have a family member murdered, and the first thing you're gonna try to do is bring a criminal case, right? The DA usually will block that unless you have a good DA. So in Nevada, we know that there hasn't been an indictment of a police officer on duty who has murdered somebody in the last 30 years. So that's not only Wolfson, it's the DA before that, right? So we're dealing with this culture, which is supported by mass media. And it started with the old Western films. It went on to things like Dirty Harry and this and that. And then it is now presented on television with such shows as the CSI, where, they always catch the bad guy, and the binary view is really supported. So you have this polarization. It's like good guy and bad guy. And our colleagues over at Mass Liberation Project definitely always point to the fact that, you might make a bad decision, but does that make you a quote unquote never made a bad decision? So we're dealing with the same paradigm of carceral citizenship or second-class citizenship for people that are labeled and stigmatized. And this happens to folks after they're murdered. So there is a kind of second assassination of the character that takes place. And the great journalist and political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal refers to that as media violence, right? And that's what we're really experiencing, because people are fooled into thinking that the police are so good at doing what they're doing, right? Well, meanwhile, what the real research shows in a recent report from the Pew Research Center, PEW, reports that only half of violent crimes reported, around 46%, are solved, right? So we're talking about less than half of violent crimes are actually solved. And of 1/3 of the property crimes, only 18% reported solved. So this is not CSI. We're dealing with a police force, which is an arm of the state tasked to protect property owners and property itself over people. And we see it happening over and over again. So qualified immunity is only one thing that families face as a challenge. The next thing that they face is that they're not eligible for regular victims of crime legislation. So if an average person has a break-in, for example, and a member of your family is murdered, you're eligible to receive some kind of benefit from the state to help bury that person, for example, to help get a lawyer. Family members who lose people to law enforcement not only get their loved ones' names dragged through the dirt and their dignity is totally extinguished, but they're harassed. They get no victims of crime legislation benefits, and there's a 0.01%, as I mentioned before, conviction on an indictment, and we never really see that. Yeah, question, Sarah Hawkins. Go ahead.
Oh, my fault. I was just going to ask, how do you think the issue of police transparency or lack of police transparency contributes to these issues?
Well, from what we know, there has been zero reporting from state agencies on the issue, right? So the only thing we know is coming from citizens that are taking it upon themselves to report these statistics, right? And that's why it's important for everybody in their community to know the family members that are affected in their town, to then ask, show up and ask, what can I do? Which is the way that we kind of developed our project. It's like, I know that I do sound, and I started getting into video. Nisa was already a professional photographer, and an illustrator. So we just took our skills and became citizen journalists to amplify the stories, right? So it has everything to do with the fact that people don't really know the circumstances. We're beginning to know now as technology comes forward and everybody has a cell phone, everybody essentially has a camera, to film everything. We know this, but this stuff has been happening since the beginning. This is actually nothing new. It's just the light is being shined on it. And when we start to see a little bit of room open up, for example, when we had the whole movement to defund the police, right, or reallocate funds to the police, we saw Joe Biden, the liberal president, move in and refund the police. And he was also one of the authors of the '94 crime bill, right? So some of the other legislation that really lends to the challenges that that community members face. By the way, law enforcement is funded by our tax dollars. It's funded by citizens, right? So when someone's murdered by law enforcement, there were two key cases that came out of the Supreme Court that are very important. And one of them was Tennessee versus, I want to say Connor versus Graham, and Tennessee versus Gardner, right? And so you have those two cases, one of which points to the fact that if a police officer is pursuing a suspect and they are found not to be violating their Fourth Amendment rights, if they feel like their life is in danger, right? Or if they feel like the suspect is going to endanger somebody else's life. This is why you always hear police officers say, I felt like my life was in danger. That completely changes the approach to the case, right? So it's kind of a shield in legislation. I believe that was in 89. And then there was the other case, Tennessee versus Gardner, I believe that was in 85. We're talking about the height of the crack epidemic, right? So right as the war on drugs is being set on the people, on Black and brown communities, largely poor white communities also, you have this legislation which is shielding police officers along with qualified immunity from being indicted, from being convicted, right? Meanwhile, if a citizen does the same thing, the assumption is that they committed the murder, right? The assumption is not innocence, the assumption is guilt. And so we're dealing with a problem that is multi-pronged, and it's these system players, to use the language of my sister Leslie Turner, you know what I mean, are working in concert to protect each other for political interests, for control, for power. And meanwhile, if you don't have the resources, if you don't have support from the community, real support, then it's very unlikely that you can get far at all in any of these cases. And that's what we really witnessed. But we taken it upon ourselves. We've got a lot of volunteers, who've come to the table with a lot of skills to offer. as citizen journalists to try to uncover some of these truths and to amplify the stories of the family members.
All right, thank you so much, Oja. I did want, you gave us the meat, the potatoes, the broth, but I wanted to give us a little bit of the vegetables when we're talking about the sheriff's office. For people who aren't from Clark County who are listening in, your sheriff only takes care of county matters, and your actual city police will take care of matters in the city. Clark County is weird. Back in the 70s, as Vegas was expanding, the Las Vegas City Police and the county sheriff's office were rolled into one office. We now call them the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. So that's why we elect our sheriff, and he's the head of the Metro Police Department. But if you're, say, in Washoe County or any other counties whose names I slipped my mind right now, you still elect your sheriff. They just have less power than, say, the city police chiefs. But yeah, Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, yes, how you doing? And I actually am a veteran, and I actually worked in law enforcement. I can agree with a lot of the statements, but there's one thing that kind of perturbs me with citizens. We aren't electing. One of the differences, and I'm not saying the military is perfect, but one of the biggest problems that I see is a lack in law enforcement of true civilian oversight. The police are essentially providing oversight to themselves. The sheriff is county sheriffs are among the most powerful elected officials in the country. They are invested with a great deal of power because the state constitutions afford them extreme power. And Clark, like you were saying, Clark is it's a unique difference with Clark because our sheriff's department has been abolished and became Metro. But one of the biggest problems, especially here in Clark, is that in order to be elected sheriff, first of all, to be elected sheriff, you don't have more than likely, but obviously to take on the duties, you have to inevitably be certified. Unfortunately, Metro officers to be sheriff of Clark County, in reality, you have to be a Metro officer. That in and of itself is problematic. There should be some years of separation between the time the person was either with the Metropolitan Police Department or an active law enforcement officer. Just as the Secretary of Defense, there has to be a certain amount of years of for them from the time they left service to the time they're serving in that position. There needs to be greater accountability. But there's also another elected position that nobody talks about, and they're constables. Constables are also elected via respective. Oh yeah, but I'll tell you, one of the things that frustrates me is we have been trying to put together training for people that to get elected these positions, you have to have law enforcement training. Unfortunately, they try to restrict who can attend some of the law enforcement training courses. So we kind of really have to talk about how do you train people to run for office? And I see it both. Most of the sheriffs are from one political party. As a Democrat, very few Democrats run for sheriff. And if they do, they don't have the qualifications to be sheriff. You got to be a sworn law enforcement officer. You've got to have sworn law enforcement experience. But we're not training candidates to be prepared to take that on. What do you suggest? I have some ideas, but what can we also do to help in that area? I also want to add another point. Woman Brittany Miller from Summerlin proposes a bill every single year for government accountability and accountability of different entities called the State Inspector General. Not one group has gotten behind that bill. She has put that bill up year after year and gotten testimony from inspectors general outside of Nevada. Nobody will support that bill. That's the type of legislation we need that can hold agencies accountable and actually investigate them and hold them accountable when they commit wrongdoing, when I mean, that's all I have to say.
All right. Thanks for your input. I know Tiara is going to be covering constables. So we're going to be covering that whole bit. And what I'll say is the talk about Inspector General and some of that, the more general law enforcement talk, I think we should save that for the end, because I know Ms. Cosgrove has been working on that in that sphere for ages, and she has a lot she would probably want to put in there. But let's try and save that to the end, once we kind of talk about all the offices, so we can encapsulate all those conversations at once. Oja, though, I saw you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing really important about one other thing that the sheriff has said as he moves towards this next position, is that when he was asked if he believed the big lie, right? We're talking about Lion Joe Lombardo here. He basically dodged a question and he said, do I think there was fraud? I'm not going to answer that, right? So this is very dangerous, because we have the FBI saying that the number one domestic homeland threat, the number one threat to the homeland in the US is white supremacy, right? When we look at Nevada, specifically West Nevada, we're looking at, West Las Vegas, we're looking at one of the biggest concentration of white supremacist groups in the nation. So when you make statements like that, you are empowering radical right groups that have already exacted violence on citizens and government, i.e. January 6th. So voters, we really need to not forget this. We can't allow this to happen.
Too right. Thank you for that input. Next person I have speaking is Mr. Mark Betancourt. Go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Hi, folks, and thanks, Oja, for that. And thank you, Mikey, and thanks for everyone for being here. And special shout out to Brandon for putting this together. And thanks again for everyone who is here. My name is Mark Betancourt, as Brandon said. I'm the project director with the Coalition Against the Death Penalty. Obviously, we didn't get there this last year, but I'm not here to talk about that or the work I've done in the past. But really just Brandon tasked me with getting the tongue-in-cheek section here. And I'm going to talk very briefly about police chiefs and the role they serve, but also the fact that while they're serving in a leadership capacity in law enforcement and within the criminal justice system, these are people who are not elected, but who are appointed by other groups of elected officials. And so to dovetail with the conversation we were just having about the sheriff, we can look at the sheriff himself in Clark County serves as the quote unquote police chief of Clark County. Depending on the municipality, so Sarah was mentioning there are some others, City of North Las Vegas, Henderson, you'll see that city councils will appoint these police chiefs. And so ultimately, and what we hope that this event will show is that all of these elected officials are set up in a system from the outset that allows them to maintain power. And, that has not worked very well for the actual people in our community. And that is why we are here. That is why these calls for justice have not ended, because it obviously has not been satiated. And so the city council, city manager in Reno, who is appointed by the city council of in Reno, will essentially appoint these police chiefs. And so for an appointed role, again, these are people who have to serve on their force, have to have accreditation. But what they can really do, and this is where the Sheriff Lombardo, and I think some of the roles that he has, are really, really dangerous. And we've seen this not only in Clark County or even across the state, but across the country at large. And that's because we see that the police chief, who is ultimately appointed and not elected, has oversight of operations, budgeting, oversight of officers. So the person who is ultimately doing disciplinary actions, someone does assault a civilian or murder a civilian, God forbid, this is the person who's supposed to be setting the guidelines for what is going to happen to them and what the repercussions will be. obviously there is a deeply ingrained culture in the society of law enforcement and in the criminal justice system for that oversight to be overlooked, to use to be a little punny, I guess. Now that's not the definition. But we also see that the recent militarization of police forces, this can in large part be done by police chiefs. And so they have, again, an immense amount of power over what is actually happening in our communities and the people who are on our streets. And the difference between someone having a conversation and a mental health officer showing up to something, and whether or not the police chief is going to invest in that, or whether they're going to invest in high-powered beanbags that they can shoot at legal observers, which of course is not what we want to see. And so this all goes back, this long chain of accountability, and as Mikey even pointed out, an ultimate lack of accountability that the civilians can have. And so there are these pressure points in some ways in the form of these elected officials in these roles who ultimately have the power to invest in individuals, regardless of a broken system, who can help shift it away from what it is right now, and who can ultimately lead to less people dead on the street and shot in the back or choked. And until we have people in those positions, or we get rid of these positions, unfortunately, these problems will undoubtedly persist. So that's my piece, to keep it brief. Technically, police chiefs aren't elected, but we elect a lot of people who appoint them. So make sure these municipal elections have even less people voting in them than in the DA's race that we spoke about earlier, for example. And so regardless of where we may fall on the political spectrum, ultimately these decisions and what we believe in is all intertwined. And so we have to be very, very aware and hyper aware. And so as we gear up for next year, and we'll inevitably start seeing advertisements on our Hulu, Netflix, YouTube, so on and so forth, we need to be very careful and think about the trail of breadcrumbs that is left, and what it actually does in our communities and to people, and what their lived experiences are. And one thing I did want to ask Oja, now that I've said my piece, is if he could share a little bit about his organization in the chat, or send people a link for where they could potentially get involved. But I've said my piece. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you, Mark. Looks like we have a question from Mr. Mikey.
Hey, how you doing? It's not so much a question, it's a statement about, so a group of veterans, and particularly veterans of color, we've come together over the past couple of years, and we've been trying to push for reform, law enforcement reform. And part of it has to do with something that happened during the constable's race. But one of the things that we discovered, we had a conversation with one of the people, he's an assemblyman, Tom Roberts, he's running for sheriff. Assemblyman Roberts, we were talking about accountability. While NRS 289, which covers all peace officers, NRS and NAC 289 has some problems. There's one thing that the statute calls for. It calls for accountability of law enforcement agencies. So any elected body, i.e. city council and county commission, can set up a body of citizens to oversee their police departments. There's two parts of that, and it's not just their police departments, it's police departments, it's the constables, as well as school police. There's also a part of that statute that allows for oversight of Metro. Now, unfortunately, the only board that exists is for Metro. North Las Vegas, Henderson, Boulder City, Mesquite do not have, or the park police, because there's many other law enforcement agencies, the DA's investigators, others do not have any type of civilian oversight. And when I've asked several council members in North Las Vegas, where I live, why haven't we set up a commission to oversee our police department? That, by the way, after our census came out, is clearly not that diverse. There's this, we don't know. So there really needs to be a greater emphasis of what's actually on the books. And we as the public, we as the people, have to start asking them, why are you not allowing us, the citizens who pay their salaries, who are who are responsible. Why are you not allowing us to oversee our departments as the law actually has already provided for?
That is definitely a fair point. I know for us that there's already been some grumblings I've heard from some folk about introducing basically strengthening that legislation and forcing a lot more municipalities to actually do the thing. So we'll see what happens with that. But I know for us, that's definitely something we'd be here to support. Did you have something else to add, or did you leave your hand up, Mikey?
Oh no, that's it. Sorry.
All right, my bad. Sarah, you had a question?
No, I just wanted to let Mikey know that in advance of this legislative session, me and 2 other people in my organization did an entire rewrite of Chapter 289. And the biggest problem is in there is that the law incorporates the Metro union contract. So that is the only thing that is what limits principally responsibility for Metro. But I would love to collaborate with your organization, with veterans who want this change, because we are rewriting that chapter, and the goal is to overhaul it in coming sessions. So please, please, please reach out to me. I would love to talk to you about it, Mikey. And anyone else.
All right. Thank you, Miss Sarah. So next person we have coming up is Miss Sandra Cosgrove. Give me just a second.
All righty.
Mind introducing yourself, madam?
Absolutely. So as soon as this PowerPoint comes up. All right. So I'm Sandra Cosgrove. I'm a history professor over at the College of Southern Nevada. Lived in Las Vegas for about 35 years. I was with the League of Women Voters for about 10 years, and now we're doing kind of a separate small nonprofit called Vote Nevada. We are very focused on civic education, good governance, and advocacy. I find almost every single day someone is going to ask me a civics question. And kind of sometimes I joke around about why civics is important, and I will say because she who knows the rules, rules. And a lot of times if you don't know the rules and kind of what you're supposed to do, it's really hard to enact reform. So that I have, do I have share screen?
Yep, I just made you a co-host.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to be kind of wonky, and I'm going to walk us through the different layers of the judiciary and talk about why we elect judges and why that's actually a really good thing for us here in Nevada. But as Sarah said, people have got to actually vote for the judges in order for this reform mechanism to mean something. So this is just information about my group Vote Nevada. And if you have any types of civics questions, you can get a hold of me and I will help find you the answer. So unfortunately, in the United States, oftentimes we only talk about the federal Constitution and the Congress, so the federal part of the government. And so a lot of people sometimes don't know that we have a state government, that you have a county government, that you have municipalities, that we have school boards. And so when people will come to me and they'll ask me a question about, well, who does this or where I'm supposed to go, they're not realizing who their local governing officials are, even though on a day-to-day basis, it's your local governing officials that are going to have the biggest impact on your life. And so if you look at, I mean, if you've seen the Schoolhouse Rock videos they're on YouTube now, or if you remember back to your government class, you remember back there's the federal Constitution, and that's the law of the land, and it establishes 3 branches of government. So you've got the legislative branch where they write laws. You've got the executive branch, they execute the laws. And then you have the judiciary, and the judiciary wasn't really sure what they were supposed to do because it wasn't in the Constitution. It's not till 1804 in Marbury versus Madison that the court just says, okay, our job is to interpret the laws based on the Constitution. And everybody went, all right. And so the judiciary gave them the power to look at the laws that were coming out of the legislature and before the executive branch could implement them, or even sometimes after, and say whether they did align with the Constitution or whether they aligned with past precedent now. If you look at our state government, you've got in the state constitution, you've got a legislative branch. That's our the Nevada State Legislature. We've got an assembly and a senate. You've got the executive branch that's headed by the governor, and we then have a judicial branch. Where you're going to see a difference between what happens at the federal level and what happens at the state level is how we decide who's going to be a judge. But you have those two layers. And so sometimes I tell people, you're probably not even aware that your state constitution, our state constitution actually gives you more rights than the federal constitution. You should know what's in that state constitution because it gives you more rights and protections than you get in the federal constitution, but we rarely talk about it. And so when you look at the federal judiciary, it's in the US Constitution, Article 3, Section 1, and it just says the judicial powers of the United States is vested in one Supreme Court and such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. And so there have been secondary courts that come under the US Supreme Court that handles different things at the federal level. So candidates for the federal court are nominated and then confirmed to the bench. And so that happens in the US Senate. So there's usually a nomination that comes from a state, and then that person is going to get a hearing in the US Senate, and they're either confirmed or they're not. But it's a confirmation process. So you and I don't get to have a whole lot of say in it. These judges then interpret and apply the law. They ensure that rights are being protected, and they resolve legal disputes. And there's many different types of courts at the federal level. So let's talk about the Nevada judiciary and then how that's different, what we get to do differently here. In the Nevada Constitution, Article 6, Section 1, it says the judicial power of the state is vested in a court system comprising a Supreme Court, a Court of Appeals, district courts, and justices of the peace. The legislature may also establish as part of the system courts for the municipal purposes only in incorporated cities and towns. But here's what's different. We get to elect our judges. So it's not an appointing process. It's not good old boys go behind the closed door and it's a smoky room and they do a selection. If you want to be a judge, you have to go in front of the people, voters, and you have to get elected. But this process only works if we're all engaged and willing to find out about the judge candidates, the judicial candidates, and then either say yes or no and vote on them. We also need to make sure that we have, I think in this last election cycle, we had 14 judicial positions where there wasn't a challenger. And so those people on the bench just basically went to the primary, got affirmed, and went right back to the bench. They didn't have to go out and talk to the people. They didn't have to, shake hands and talk about why they're a good judge. And so that's kind of one of the weaknesses, but we need to get more people who are going to run to be judge. So we've got the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, District Court, and then Justice and Municipal Court. All right, so let's talk about why we elect judges. So if you look about 150 years ago, so this is the progressive period, which came about in response to the Gilded Age, because the Gilded Age was horribly corrupt. Politics was corrupt, the economy was corrupt, and you're going to have kind of the people's movement that tries to reform it. They're not powerful enough, and it's going to be the progressives that are going to come up and try to change the way we do government to get rid of the corruption. So 150 years ago, you've got reformers, they're responding to government corruption. And for them, the solution is going to be holding public officials accountable. And so they're thinking, okay, if we're going to get rid of corruption, we've got to let the people be involved. They're going to be the ones that are going to hold corrupt people accountable. So as you have new states joining the union, especially in the West, because the Western states come in later, these reforms become embedded in their constitution, including judicial elections. And so they were looking at the judiciary under the Gilded Age and just looking at horribly corrupt judges that were taking bribes and kickbacks. And instead of saying, let's just write a bunch of laws and see if we can get them under control, say, no, yank them off the bench, force them in front of the voters, force them to ask hat in hand to have their job back, and then let the voters decide whether they want this corrupt person to go back or not. And so this was a way to address corruption. And so advocates are going to argue that electing judges is going to eliminate the corruption in the appointing process, and which was being controlled by the political parties. So Nevada is going to be one of those states that adopts this type of reform. But electing public servants does not improve independence or accountability if voters skip voting in those races. And unfortunately, we see this happening a lot when it comes to the judiciary. And so voters tend to be less aware of what judges do and how the judicial system works. And so it's often harder for them to evaluate if a judicial candidate's qualifications are right or not. And so voters sometimes hesitate, and if they don't have some way to kind of point them in a direction or not, they'll skip those races. But if you skip the races, then we're losing that mechanism of getting rid of corruption through accountability and voting. And so when you look at what judges do, this is just a very brief summary of what judges do. They have a lot of power. And sometimes people will say to me, oh, I'm never going to be in front of a judge. Yeah, you are. There's going to be something, whether you're getting a divorce, going through an adoption, you've got parking tickets, something's going to happen. Eventually, we're all going to end up standing in front of a judge, and we need to make sure that those judges are impartial and that they're fair. So the Nevada Supreme Court hears all appeals from the district courts, and they only rule on procedures, not the facts of the case. They can refer cases to the Court of Appeals, and they administer the state judicial system. The Court of Appeals helps with cases that are appealed up. So if you have some type of malfeasance that happens in your case, let's say you've got a district attorney that does something wrong and it's going to be appealed, it's going to go up either to the Nevada Supreme Court or to the Court of Appeals. District courts, these are general jurisdiction. So all legal disputes related to criminal, civil, juvenile, and family matters. So they hear also appeals from the justice and the municipal courts, so the courts below them. Justice courts are misdemeanor, crime, traffic matters, small claims disputes, evictions, which is a big thing right now, civil matters, less than $15,000. And then you've got justices of the peace, which preside over felonies and gross misdemeanors and arrange for preliminary hearings. And then you've got municipal courts, which manage traffic violations, misdemeanors, and then ordinances within the city limits. This is a lot of power. And if you've got laws that are passed by a legislature like we do in our state, that's only in session 120 days every other year, that means somebody's going to be interpreting their laws when they're not in session. And so if there's any type of vagueness or something that's not really clear in the law, that judge is going to take it upon him or herself to do an interpretation of what they think that law actually says. So who can run? I mean, we don't have a real high bar for who can run. Eligibility to run for a judicial office in the state of Nevada, you have to be a bona fide resident of the state for 2 years, only 2 years, be a qualified elector. So that means you have to be able to be a registered voter and be 25 years of age. So those are the general requirements. You have to be a licensed attorney admitted to practice in the courts of the state of Nevada or another state or the District of Columbia, not less than 15 years. Be a licensed attorney admitted to practice in the courts of the state of Nevada in another state, not less than 10 years for some of the judicial positions. This actually isn't a very high bar for people to be able to run. And so it's really important if you've got people who have a ton of experience that are really good, and then you've got people who are really just making it over that bar, you as the voter really need to be engaged to make sure that if we've got somebody good with a lot of experience, that they're going to get back on the bench, or vice versa. Maybe you've got someone that's corrupt that's been on the bench for a while, and you've got someone that's a go-getter that's just now made these eligibility requirements. Maybe that's the person we need to go with, but you and I need to make sure that we're involved to do that. What I hear from people, from voters, when they're trying to figure out who to vote for is judicial candidates are different than other candidates because, number one, they don't have a party affiliation in our state. So they're not going to be an R or a D. So you're not going to be able to use that shorthand. They don't have platforms. They shouldn't have platforms because they should just fairly interpret and apply the law. So each case should be on its own merits. They should not be prejudging. So it's unethical for a judicial candidate, if you said to them, how would you rule in such and such a case? If they tell you, don't vote for that person because they're unethical. They should just tell you, I would be fair, it would be on the merits of the case, I would follow the law, because that's what they're supposed to say. They can be endorsed by individuals and organizations, and so sometimes people just look for endorsements. They can discuss their legal philosophy. So, what do you think about cash bail? They would have an opinion about that. They can discuss their experience. So if they've been on the bench or what, law school they graduated from, and they can discuss their qualifications. And so if they've got experience on the bench already, what types of cases have they ruled on? Have they been overturned? And if yes, how many times? And so it's really important to have a crib sheet with you when you're talking to judicial candidates to remind yourself that they're a little bit different and not to ask them for a party platform or how would you rule, but instead say, where did you go to law school? Have you been on the bench? What's your judicial philosophy? Those are types of questions they can ask. And so have a crib sheet where you're saying, which court are you running for? What does that court do? What would a judge do in that court? What type of jurisdiction do they have? Do you feel that you are qualified to be the best judge? If you look at your opponent, what would be the difference between you and that person? What's your legal philosophy? And you might have to look up on legal philosophies because there's a range of them, but they can talk to you about that. Talk about experience and ask them, what other questions should I be asking you? Because most of the time they're going to tell you, it's a family judge, they're going to tell you what happens in family court and why that's different than a district court. When we go into an election cycle, you're going to want to look for voter guides. Now, a lot of the voter guides are online, so you're going to see them on websites, their social media. Make sure you're going to reliable news sources when they're talking about the judicial races, that you're getting good, reliable information. This last election cycle, we did a video voter guide on YouTube. We're definitely going to redo that again because it was good to hear the judicial candidates. And we're going to try and make sure that we have a much more robust voter guide that really talks about the background of each of the candidates. All right, I know that was a lot of wonky kind of civics information, but it really, really worries me that judges have as much power as they do in this state, but because it's a little bit confusing that people they choose to opt out and not vote for them. So I just want to make sure that everybody feels empowered to vote. And that's the end.
All right, thank you so much, Sandra. Looks like we have a question from Amy.
Yeah, this is a great presentation. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I have a question. Last time, I mean, this last cycle, when it came to voting for judges, I know personally, I spent hours
terrible.
trying to look all over the internet to see if I could get an idea of where they aligned with their viewpoints on law. Trying to see if I could figure out, you know, if they would take in, like for instance, for me particularly, it's very important that a judge takes in a person's background, where they are financially, what's happening around their life. And like, that was like very hard. And there were so many, there was no way you could possibly go to all of them.
Right.
I was wondering if there's an initiative to, and again, nonpartisan, but just talking where people get together, some kind of guide across the board that would ask these more in-depth questions, because, you know, I put a lot of effort into it, but I'm not sure the average voter would even go to those lengths. And
yeah, this election cycle was even worse. It was like there was like 81 judicial races on everybody's ballot. That's like everybody's ballot was like 4 pages long.
right.
It was terrible. No, and I'm glad you said that, because that's the type of voter guide we want to create this time, where we really look at the judges that are on the bench right now and start writing profiles of them. And start of kind of updating links to their cases, their rulings, if they're overturned, if they end up in the news, and not because we got caught flat-footed because it was July when all of a sudden we realized, oh my God, there's like 125 of them. How are we going to do a voter guide? We can't ever do that again because it was just too overwhelming. So I agree with you. And I'm going to put my email address over in the chat. If you want to email me, what we're going to need to do is kind of crowdsource it a little bit. And maybe say, okay, we're each going to be in charge of maybe 2 judges and get all the information possible and get it onto a website that is permanent so that we have that information by January.
Awesome.
Because I agree with you.
Definitely good to hear. I know I feel bad. I think it was last election was the first time I actually voted in any of the judicial races, almost exclusively because some of the information you put out. So
I was really nervous that nobody was going to vote for judges, and we had really important races last time. And so it was nerve-wracking.
no doubt. Were there any other questions, or I will take all the turned off cameras as a no.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate you. We have a few more people left. Next person is Tiara with a plan. You with us? Maybe.
Yep, I'm here.
All right, give me just a second. All right, do you mind talking about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Tiara Moore. I am the housing justice organizer with Plans. I don't know if you know a little bit. Oh, what happened? Okay, can you hear me? Because something happened.
No, you're good.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay. Yes, I'm the housing justice organizer here at Plans. We work to be. Get that from her because she keep calling, knocking my thing out.
Let me get that from her. Get that from her.
Sorry, it's kids over here. So I work with Plan as a housing justice organizer, working to build power in the community around housing justice, educating the community on just housing issues and changing policy around housing issues. I have a little presentation. You can read a little bit about myself. I've been in Nevada since 2016. But I do have a little presentation. I don't know, Brendan. Okay, if I share my screen, I don't know anything about sharing screens.
Yep, go ahead and hit share screen and then select your primary screen where your presentation will be.
Now, what is it? Okay. Yeah, it didn't work.
Do you have it on PowerPoint?
I do. Is this it? Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
When you hit the share screen button, you should have, it said like screen one, and then it'll give you the option for the different.
No, it don't give me none of that.
All right, what are you seeing?
So do you see on your bar below, do you see the PowerPoint icon?
Mm-hmm.
So click on that so that your PowerPoint comes up so you can see it.
Wait a minute.
Did it
No,
pop up on your screen?
no.
So maybe you don't have it opened.
I have it open. It's on my screen right now. It's
Okay, so now go back to your to the toolbar on the bottom of your screen and click on the blue camera for Zoom. And then try to share screen again, because sometimes it'll only read whatever the last thing you had up was. It's weird.
Yeah, okay. Is that it? Nope, that's not it.
All right.
Laura, do you see a green share screen button on the bottom of the
I
Zoom?
see the share screen. Yep.
Okay, so when you click that, what happens?
It just goes to, it says desktop one, whiteboard.
Yeah, select desktop one.
Okay. It says, okay, open. Now can you see it?
You have to hit the blue share button.
I hit it. It didn't do it.
Now, I'll just run it on my side and just tell me when to skip to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah. For some odd reason, my screen it doesn't allow me to share.
All right, you're good to go. Just tell me when.
Okay, you can, like I said, again, my name is Tiara Moore. I'm the Housing Justice Organizer with Plan. You can go to the next slide. We're gonna talk about the constable. Yep, so the constables are elected officials with they're sworn deputies who carry a badge and a gun. Constables are also the people who execute evictions. They come do the lockout once the judge have granted the eviction. So like they come put a notice on your door to say there will be to lock you out in 24 to 48 hours. You can go to the next slide. The primary role of a deputy constable is to enforce evictions, serve civil documents such as subpoenas, property liens, court summons, wage garnishment, and they also carry guns and tasers, but they don't take people to jail. So I haven't really seen a constable take anyone to jail unless they have to call the police and like have the police come and arrest you because you're not complying with something that they're there to do, which is a lockout. You can go to the next slide. So the law defines constables as peace officers, giving them full range and reach of, like they're considered police officers because they put themselves in like dangerous situations. They're sworn in. They're no different than actual police. They just don't take anybody to jail and like arrest. They don't have like handcuffs and things like that. So, but they are considered peace officers. So you can be charged with like resisting arrest and things like that. But you can go to the next slide, Brandon. Deputy constables, like this is something I didn't know. They're paid over $100,000 a year. I might be a constable. But it says deputy constables get paid based on the number of papers they serve. Deputy constables earn over $100,000 a year. The office in which they earn like $100 for like each vehicle that they tow, or like, it's really interesting how I read it, but they get paid a lot of money. You can go to the next slide. And this is like actually like my vehicle, right? So it's like, why should we care like what constables do? Because when I moved in my apartment, April the 1st, May 1st, so constables obviously are notified that new people are moving in, especially if you're from out of state, because I still had Illinois license plates. And when I moved into my apartment, I still had Illinois plates. And I was going to register, but we know the DMV had been packed and like there was like appointments booked out for months. So I wasn't able to get to the DMV. So when I moved in my apartment April the 1st, May 1st, I moved in March. So 30 days after I move in, I get this green sticker on my window telling me that I was in registration violation. Basically, I have Nevada, I have residency now, and they obviously wanted me to switch my plates over because I had been there over 30 days. And they put this tow sticker on my window. So immediately, like the next day, and they only, as you can see, they gave me, I think it was like 2 days or something like that to get this fixed. They was going to tow my vehicle from in front of my place. So I hurried up, went to the DMV. I stood in that long line. It was very long and it was a hot mess. And I got my license plates that very same day. But as you can see, I put that on the back of my window. So when they came to try and tow my shit, they saw that sign. But that is a little bit about like what the constable does, and like being, having to go through an eviction. I didn't even know constables actually ride through apartment complexes, or they're notified that you have like new residents, that they put this on my vehicle. And I was like, what? But yeah, but I don't know if anybody have any questions. I haven't really dealt with the constable like in person. Like I've never seen the constable. I haven't had like any interaction. I deal with the constable when people are notified that they're going to be locked out, and we have to go and put them in touch with like legal aid to file a stay. But I haven't like actually had any communication or dealings with the actual constable, or them leaving that sticker on my car. But if anybody have any questions, yeah, I see 2 people. I think it was Mikey first.
So I can kind of help you out on this one because I know a lot about this.
Okay.
Constables are elected by townships. So they are traditionally constables, and very similar to Texas has constables. They're elected to the the Justice of the Peace Township. So they're divided into, like, for example, North Las Vegas Township has one, Las Vegas Township has one. They're divided by the township. The county commission can establish or disestablish them at will. So in a case like Las Vegas's township constable was abolished in 2014 because of abuse. They had engaged in massive misconduct. So they are civil law enforcement. They can enforce any civil order of a judge. So they can enforce, as you were saying, evictions. They can enforce any type of order civil order by a judge. In addition, the state also grants them the power. Anyone can make a complaint about your tags. If someone makes a complaint, the constable can be notified. The state authorizes the constable to enforce that statute, and for that they get a portion of the ticket. The other part of it is constables are actually not government employees. They're independent contractors. So the elected constable is the only government employee. So the elected constable gets paid $100,000 plus, depending on which township they're in. But the deputies are independent contractors paid independently by the constable. And in fact, while their vehicles are registered with exempt plates, the vehicle is actually owned by the deputy. It's a very mix match system ripe for abuse. I want to share something because I had a friend of mine in North Las Vegas who ran for constable several years ago. So in North Las Vegas Township, our constable was not peace officer certified. Up until a couple of years ago, the constable had to, when they did not have to be a peace officer at election. They had to be certified, I believe, within 6 months of becoming constable. The constable out in North Las Vegas, Eliason, could not pass the physical fitness test in order to be certified. Technically, he was supposed to be decertified and he was supposed to be removed from office. When he tried to get removed, when the commission tried to remove him, he sued the county commission, and he said that they could not remove him because he then claimed that he could not pass because of ADA, because of a disability. There's no in the peace officer certification, there is no exemption. There's no exemptions. So he could not. So he and they've been going through a court process for several years. When my friend decided to run against the constable in 2018, the constable basically, what they did was they accused my friend of violating the residency laws. And he was actually investigated. He was cleared by the Secretary of State's office, but then subsequently investigated by Metro Intelligence, probably at the insistence of the constable and several county commissioners who supported the constable. And my friend, who's a Latino veteran, got charged with seven charges, including, I believe, 3 felonies and it is the most ridiculous thing we've ever seen. The constables are extremely powerful, but they're often ignored. And they've just now changed the statute a few years ago to require that any person elected constable must be a peace officer upon election. So we have got to start training. The positions aren't going away. We have to start organizing, in my opinion, and training qualified reformers to run for these positions. These positions are available, and that's a position that I'll tell you needs massive change. It is so open to abuse. In fact, that's why they abolished it in Las Vegas Township. They were hiring people that weren't qualified. They hired a person who actually had been convicted of a felony. I mean, there were major problems. So there's need for reform.
You're definitely right. Thanks for that. Amy, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Also a statement. I can't believe they were looking at your tags, and especially in as large as of town as we have a military presence here. There's lots of people who have out-of-state tags, and legally so. So that's pretty surprising. But my question was, I haven't heard of any, but I'd be very interested to know, have we had situations here in Las Vegas where there has been excessive force used by constables? Like, is that something that is an issue here in Las Vegas? I haven't seen anything in the news or heard of anything, but I was just wondering if anyone had any insight on that.
I haven't heard about any of the constables. I haven't heard. Like, that's really interesting. Like, I wonder how would we find that information out, but I haven't heard. Even with the pandemic and people being evicted, I think more people are just getting up leaving, and they don't want to like really be locked out. So I'm guessing, but I would love to find that information out. I have someone I can ask that question, but I haven't heard anything, and it hasn't been anything in the news in regards to like there's any physical altercations with constables or like excessive force. I do know around Thanksgiving, the constable had a 24-hour lockout notice on a woman with she had like 6 kids, and she didn't respond to the eviction notice. She didn't know she had to file an answer. And the eviction was granted by default because she didn't respond. And the constable put a notice saying that they were going to lock her out. So she would have been locked out the day before Thanksgiving. And we were like, oh no, that's not going to happen. We like, we just not letting the constable in. Like, we won't stand at the door, like, we just not letting the constable in, kind of thing. But we were able to get in touch with like legal aid and like some of the electeds in her district and like stop that lockout, because she was a mother of 6 and it was literally the day before Thanksgiving. So it was the 24th and Thanksgiving was on the 25th. And I'm like, her and her family would have been locked out for Thanksgiving. So, but I haven't heard anything. I'm definitely going to research and find that information out.
Can I add something, Tara? Because the actual, it's interesting. In Las Vegas Township, the de facto constable is also the sheriff. So the sheriff took over when they abolished it. They turned that responsibility over to the sheriff. So what the sheriff does is they hire retired Metro officers to serve as independent contractors. If you ever see gray Ford Explorers driving around, they are constables, but they are retired Metro officers. So they have had some excessive force incidents in Las Vegas Township, but those are investigated by Metro. Those would be investigated by Metro. But as far as the other townships are concerned, North Las Vegas, Henderson Township, Boulder City Township, Mesquite, Bunkerville Township, all the other townships, those have not, they may have them, but there's no reporting mechanism for that.
It's slightly unfortunate. OJ, you had your hand up too?
Yeah, I just wanted to point at the intersectionality between these issues, because one of the things I didn't mention is that we only know of a minority number of family members that are affected by police violence, right? Like, the majority of these folks have been affected in their mental health, lose their jobs, become addicted, and end up being houseless, right? So when you look at the constable evicting people, we can see a whole nother portion of the houseless population coming from that. So we put these issues together between veterans coming back with no services, no mental health services, people getting evicted. This is where we're getting houseless folks from. And we know that in Nevada, and specifically in Las Vegas, which is kind of like $1 billion small town, we have a real problem in terms of lack of services for houseless folks. And as Sarah Hawkins has mentioned before, a big problem when it comes to lack of services for mental health services. So, I just want to commend the Sister Tiara for the good work, and also highlight the fact that before we started this, we were talking about how these issues are all intersectional, all right? So as we move forward and uncover some of how they link up, it's going to become clearer to the citizens in Nevada, especially Las Vegas, to take action.
Yeah, absolutely. And any other questions? All right, looks like silence means no. Next person I have up is Ms. Gabrielle with the National Lawyers Guild. Give me just a second. Boom. So feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gabriela. I'm actually using the same shirt in the picture. I'm a law student. I'm an intern for the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty, and I'm a student attorney. I will present today about justices of peace. So give me 1 second to share the screen.
You're good to go.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes, you can see it.
You're good to go.
Good. Okay. It's very short. Straight to the point. So, justices of peace. So, what is a justice of peace? They are elected or appointed, depending on the state. In Nevada, they are elected. they basically administer criminal civil justice in minor cases, and they refer them to higher courts. So it's usually petty criminal cases and misdemeanors. They can officiate weddings, issue arrest warrants, and deal with traffic violations. The justices of peace also have the authority on cases involving small debts and landlord and tenant disputes, which is really important right now, and other small claim courts. They're usually faster and not as formal as proceedings in other courts. Justices of peace in Nevada, their duties are set according to the township, and it is followed by the Nevada revised statutes in 4.1. You can see all the information there. It's divided in townships and departments. Any county whose population has 700,000 or more people have justice of peace. And the term of the office is for 6 years. So to be a candidate who qualifies to be a justice of peace, a person who has a good track record, that they haven't been removed from any official position or have a pending issue. They must have a high school diploma, but in counties where the population is more than 100,000 people, the person who's running must have a law degree and must be practicing for more than 5 years. So there are 65 justices of peace at 40 justice courts. And just like in other parts of the US, to deal with small claims, summary evictions, traffic cases, also any disputes up to $10,000 in small claims. And why justices of peace are so important, even though they do more minor things compared to other courts, it's because they can set bail, they can appoint counsel for indigent defendants, and they're the first people that funnel others through the justice system. And they basically, depending on who they are, can protect people from bad treatment from the government or from the justice system. And a lot of people don't know what justices of peace do. They don't know how to vote for them. And because they're elected, it is very important. There's websites that have more information, but the reason why I got interested in justices of peace is because I met Belinda Harris, who was running when I met her through work with the National Lawyers Guild. So here's Belinda. I'm sure a lot of you know about her. She is amazing. She was Chief Deputy Public Defender. So I think it is important that justices of peace are public defenders or know about lay everyday people and their issues and people in poverty and who are discriminated. And in the past, Nevada has not had justices like Belinda, who is a woman, who is African American, and who does care a lot about people. And even on a personal level, Belinda, she swore me in as a student attorney. She also personally went to get my car keys when CCDC lost them. So on a personal level, as a public defender and as a judge, she is amazing. So we definitely need more people like Belinda that really do understand the issues that people have and who understands the disempowered populations, so they're not further funneled into a system that could really oppress them and just bring in more years and, you know, the circle of poverty and issues that they could have in the legal system. So yeah, that's basically it. Does anybody have any questions? Oja, I see your hand is raised. Let me stop sharing my screen.
I think that was from before, but
Okay.
I just wanted to say, like, it's kind of oxymoronic, you know, from our point of view, the titling, Justice peace officers. I'm kind of wondering about the origin, if anybody knows, because we always like, there's not much peace going on.
Actually, the history, it comes from an old English tradition. It's like 12th century. The king would send officers to basically stop disorderly conduct in different towns. And it came official in like the 14th century. There were actual official titles. And it kind of got brought from, England to the United States as a formal rule. And of course, in the past, justices of peace, they kind of have selected where they impose their peace. And just as we know, they have a lot of discretion into what they do and what they decide. So they could easily, if somebody already has a history, they are racist or homophobic or many other things, they could easily put people in worse positions and just put them in more proceedings and in higher courts, basically where they could get more in trouble.
Oh, I do want to add one thing. In the West, during westward expansion, you end up with people living ridiculously far away from population centers. So justice of the peace end up becoming like the de facto legal system for a lot of rural people that were colonizing the West. So it's partially why we still have them. They've kind of fallen away on the East Coast. It's more like a novelty position, but out in the West, they still have a lot of power, mostly because of that legacy. But yeah, any other questions? Hearing none, I'll move to our last person, Will from Battleborn Progress. There you go.
Hey, Brandon, thank you so much.
All right, so I guess I took part of your thunder, but feel free to introduce yourself.
Oh, terrific. Hi, everybody. My name is Will Bregman. I am the Communications Director for Battleborn Progress. We are a nonprofit communications firm that generally specializes in traditional and social media outreach and engagement. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about the Attorney General's office. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Pull up my slides here.
Sorry, just a second. You should be good to go.
Does that work? Does everybody see it?
You're perfect.
Sweet. All right. So the last office we're going to discuss tonight is the Attorney General's office. There we go. The Attorney General is considered the top law enforcement officer in Nevada. The Attorney General's responsibilities mainly include investigating, prosecuting crimes, civil law violations. They will advise various state agencies and inform them on regulations and how they enforce those various regulations. Ideally, they act to protect the civil rights of Nevadans or whatever state they may be in, and represent the state in all legal matters. The Attorney General also does have some supervisory powers over district attorneys. They can request information regularly on the business conducted by district attorneys. They can also take over or insert themselves basically into prosecution or proceedings in a case. The Attorney General is elected every 4 years. They serve 4-year terms. Qualifications for office are one must be 25 years or older and must be a qualified elected which could be something that might concern people, but technically that is all you need to be an Attorney General of the state of Nevada. These elections are statewide elections, so it'll appear on everyone's ballot in the general election. And it is a partisan office. So going to Dr. Cosgrove's earlier point about closed primaries, they are selected based on a partisan basis, and the general election will be on everyone's ballot. and they are term limited to only 2 terms in office. And vacancies, if there is one, if the Attorney General is removed or leaves office for any reason, they are filled via a governor's appointment. And the person that the governor appoints serves until the next election to finish out their predecessor's term. Under the Attorney General's office, there are a variety of different divisions. It's actually a pretty complex department. Some of the bureaus that are included underneath the Attorney General's office include the Bureau of Consumer Protection, which, as you can imagine, handles the enforcement of things like unfair trade, antitrust laws, scams and types of fraud and things of that nature. You've probably seen the Attorney General in the news talking about things like telemarketer scams or things of that nature. That's the type of thing that tends to fall under that bureau. The Bureau of Criminal Justice includes a couple different divisions. First, the fraud unit that goes after various types of fraud, whether that be in financial type stuff or workers' comp, insurance, that sort of thing. Then there's also the Special Prosecutors Division, which is the AG's unit dedicated to prosecuting state law violations. Next, there's the Bureau of Government Affairs. This has 6 different divisions that are dedicated to different things. This is where the responsibilities and duties of advising and helping form and enforce regulations for various different agencies in the state occurs. Then there's finally the Bureau of Litigation, which is probably the one most relevant to the topics, a lot of the topics that we're discussing tonight here, because this is what handles a lot of the legal proceedings in civil and criminal cases. This is where their legal research and writing is housed, and they will be the ones who represent the court in writing and research for the Nevada Supreme Court and also the federal court system as well. So I'm not sure if you're able to read this on your screen. If you enlarge your window, you might be able to see it better, but this is basically a rough chart of what the Nevada Attorney General's office, or how the Nevada Attorney General's office is structured. So you have the Attorney General themselves at the top. Then there's an Assistant Attorney General. In our case, we actually have 2 assistants, the Chief of Staff for the Attorney General. Then there's an advisor, general counsel out on the side. Underneath the Assistant Attorney General and the Chief of Staff are all of the bureaus that we just went over. So all of the bureaus will report to the Assistant Attorney General and the Chief of Staff. They report on up to the Attorney General themselves. So our current Attorney General of Nevada, Aaron D. Ford, he's the first Black statewide constitutional officer in Nevada history, and he was elected in 2018. So he'll be up for re-election coming up here in 2022. He previously served in the state legislature. He was formerly Senate Majority Leader, or in some years Minority Leader, of the Nevada State Senate. So he has pretty extensive legislative experience in addition to his legal background. Major priorities of his tenure as AG have included criminal justice reforms, going after fraud and scams, addressing the opioid epidemic through lawsuits against certain pharmaceutical companies, and fighting against human trafficking. There are also several other personnel within the AG's office. We have 2 assistant attorney generals, Kyle George and Christine Brady. Then there's the chief of staff, Jessica Adair. The solicitor general, who tends to handle the appellate side of the attorney general's duties, is Heidi Perry Stern. And then their general counsel is Leslie Nino Piro. So what to look for in an attorney general? We went over the formal qualifications, which are 25 and older, being a qualified elector in the state, and being a resident for at least 2 years. I would like to think that all of us on the call have a little bit higher standards than that for the attorney general of the state. So some professional qualifications to look for, obviously, would be someone who has served their community either as an elected official or a community leader in some capacity. You'd probably want someone who is knowledgeable of the legal system, appeals process, has demonstrated that experience in law. We wouldn't want to just pick me, for example, or any old person off the street to do this incredibly important job. And then you'd want someone who acts lawfully, particularly in meeting standards for ethics, open meetings, transparency, and of course, campaign finance law. When it comes to attitudes on policy, someone who values and understands the importance of protecting civil rights is extremely important. The alternative, obviously, would be an attorney general who doesn't advocate on behalf of their constituents or doesn't fight for their best interests when it comes to state matters. Someone who is fair-minded, obviously, who's not biased, free from prejudice, impartial, who will act and interpret the law in good faith and seek justice whenever necessary, and willingness and determination to hold those in power accountable when necessary. The Attorney General has a lot of power when it comes to representing the state in various legal matters. And so someone who wields that power with the interest of justice in mind, as opposed to special interests or other government agencies when inappropriate, is not someone you'd want as Attorney General. And the last one I included was will leverage their office's influence to disrupt patterns of injustice. So an example of this might be during this most recent legislative session, Attorney General Ford's office had a bill to study the patterns and practice of law enforcement agencies, to analyze them for their practices when it comes to enforcing the law, especially along from a racial justice lens. So that's one example of something they can do, but I think we would all agree there might be a lot more that the Attorney General could be capable of, especially in exercising their supervisory role over various district attorneys. And then finally, I just had a few helpful links and resources. I can include some of these in the chat. But of course, any information about the Attorney General that you might want to learn can be found at their website, which is ag.nv.gov. There's a wide variety of links on there, not just information, but also how you can get in contact with the various different divisions and departments. Particular ones that might be interesting to you are the bureaus of consumer protection, which you can report instances of fraud or scams and things like that. There's also ability to request public records from the Attorney General as well. I included a link to that form there. There are general contact and complaint forms that you can fill out on there as well. And I think there are, if you go through the website and take a look at it, there's links to just about every bureau or division has a phone number or contact link or form that you can fill out to get in touch with them about finding more information or making some sort of claim. And then I also included the link to NRS Chapter 228, which is the part of Nevada law that outlines the Attorney General's office and what their responsibilities are, and the various procedures that they have to follow for compliance. And then finally, the address I included there, that is the Capitol office address. You can take a screenshot of that or can copy that into the chat. And that's a way to get in touch with the Attorney General's office directly. whether by mail or phone or email. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much, Brandon and Mark, for having me. I'm open to any questions we may have. And yeah.
Looks like we have a question from Miss Lori. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Yeah, you have it right. I have a question, your criteria. Does the Attorney General have to have past experience in trying cases?
That's a great question. In the Nevada Revised Statute, they actually do not. They just have to be a qualified elector, have lived in the state for 2 years prior to their election, and be 25 or older. So that, again, you can look at as a bit of a troubling scenario. Typically, we don't have attorneys general who are elected who are completely inexperienced, but that would definitely be another qualification that I think people should look out for, and definitely a question to ask if somebody with no experience hops in the race.
Thank you. That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, Mr. Mark, I think that is just about the end. Mark's going to handle our outro real quick. There you go.
Yeah, I'm going to do a little song and dance for you all. No. I just wanted to wrap up and say thank you to all of our speakers again for taking the time this evening. Thank you for everyone who joined us on your Friday nights. And if your friends and family, colleagues, etc., didn't want to make it on their Friday night, but they still wanted to check in, this is going to be up on our Facebook and socials and so on and so forth some point this weekend or next week. So keep an eye out there. We'll probably also be cutting these videos up into individual sections on our Facebook page and website so folks can look it up and go, hey, I want to listen to Will telling me about the Attorney General's office and how crazy it is that they don't actually have to know really anything to run for that office. And before I let you all go, it would be much to my chagrin if I were not to ask you all to sign a petition to stop the execution of Zane Floyd. This is still on the docket when we're thinking about the direct impacts of some of these offices. The district attorney is trying to take the life of Zane Floyd this year. And when we talk about why the death penalty is so important and why, or rather abolition of the death penalty is so important, this is why. It's always a tool in the toolbox of the oppressors. And until we remove that tool, they can still carry out state-sanctioned murder. So if you haven't, please, I just put a bit.ly in. I'm going to put it again because everyone was messaging. Please make sure you sign that, share that on your social media. And if you are interested in learning more about his clemency campaign and the work that we're doing, reach out to myself or Brandon, or just slide into the DMs on our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And we will find you, get back to you, and find a way for you to help support these efforts. But without that, I know it was a long night for us, a little over. So thank you for bearing with us. And thank you again to our speakers. And special shout out to Brandon for putting this event together. Thank you, Sandra, Will, Oja. Thank you, Tiara. Thank you, Gabby, our #1 awesome intern. And of course, thank you to really to all of you. So we'll leave it at that. And if you want to hang out for a little bit, make sure you make sure you ask your questions here. Otherwise, have a nice night.